Well, let me back up a little bit. I'm going to have to define terms. We have an individuated unit of consciousness, and we have a thing I call a free will awareness unit. Okay. Now, these are just functional definitions. Don't make these things into real things. These are metaphors. They're functional definitions. We have how consciousness functions. And the individuated unit of consciousness we'll call, it has the accumulation function. It accumulates experience and evolves from it. It makes choices, accumulates experience, and evolves. This free will awareness unit is a piece of it. So we have an individual unit of consciousness, and it's going to take just a subset of itself from its being level, not from its intellect, just from its being level. And there will be, so here it is, and I take this amount of potential being, right? So it's got all the things it needs. It's got enough memory. It's got enough processing. It's got all the things it's going to need to be aware and conscious. But it doesn't have a VR. It doesn't have a virtual reality. It's just a piece set aside. There is no virtual reality. Well, if there is no virtual reality, it's not conscious. Remember, we just said you need virtual reality for consciousness. It can't communicate. It has no history. It has no experience. It's just a piece of consciousness, of proto-consciousness, of potential consciousness. It's not consciousness yet, because there's no virtual reality. There's no history. There's no memory. I mean, there's memory, but it's like blank. You know, there's nothing on it. But what it does have is all of the quality, all of the basic, what should we call it, essence of its parent, the IUOC. The IUOC has evolved up to this point, and this little piece of itself that comes out of its being level has that. It has the potential to be that. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be that, but it has the potential to be that. It's got what it takes to have that, to do that. So now, you take that free will awareness unit and you let it start experiencing. You, if you will, you attach it through a VR. You give it a VR of this physical reality, what I call PMR, physical matter reality. So now you say, okay, we'll plug you into this VR. Suddenly it's got a data stream and it's in the VR. Okay, but it's immersed in that VR. You see, that's its job. The free will awareness unit is a totally immersed experience. Its only reality is that VR, because that's the only data stream it has. It has just this one data stream, and that's the data stream, like the data stream to your computer on World of Warcraft. You know, it has that one data stream, and what is it? Well, it's an infant. It's probably a 4 month into the 5 months into the gestation infant who's hearing its first sounds and feeling its first motion, and it evolves to where it starts kicking, its mom from the inside and things like that. So it has some awareness even then. And what is it learning? Well, it's starting from scratch. It doesn't have any of the baggage of its parent. Okay? It has only the potential of its parent. All the potential that this parent has put together up to this time, it has that, but it doesn't have any of the baggage. And a lot of people would say, yeah, but it needs memory, it needs all this, it needs to be able to know where it came from and so on. It doesn't. All that is unnecessary. Let's say it did know. Let's say it did know the last several lifetimes. If you can just even limit it to that. So let's say it did. What would it do? Well, it would start second guessing. It would be making its decisions from its intellect if it had intellectual information and not just being level information. So if it had intellectual information, it would be saying, well, I remember last time I did this, I think I'll do something different. And you'd say, well, what's wrong with that? It's learning. No, that's all intellectual. It's acting. It's being, it has an image. It's acting. You don't want it to act. That just gets in the way. It has to interact at the being level. It has to be exactly who it is and does exactly the way it feels, because that is expressing itself. And then it has to see, how does that play? What kind of feedback do you get from being real? Not what kind of feedback do you get by pretending to be something you're not. You see? So we don't want it to have an intellectual memory from where it's come from, because that will just get in the way. That's why this free will awareness unit gets old and has to be recycled, because eventually it paints itself in a corner with so many beliefs and so many constraints on itself. Because of those beliefs, it gets closed off, and its growth rate slows way, way down, because it's had this experience and now it second guesses everything. It doesn't really just react out of the now and what it is. It's got all these overlays of culture, what I should do, what I shouldn't do, how I should be, how I shouldn't be. It's got all of this, and you don't want that new free will awareness unit to be burdened by all of that stuff.
You're speaking of past lives, and this question comes up often. It seems, people say it seems such a waste to lose all of the experience you've gained.
No, it's absolutely necessary to lose it all at the intellectual level. You don't lose any of it at the being level. So the quality gained from all that experience, all the good decisions you made, all the love and caring that you demonstrated, okay, that raises you up to a little higher, level of evolution, if you will. And that you retain, the potential for that, that's there. But what you don't retain is this intellect that remembers it, because the intellect will get in your way. You can't grow anywhere except at the being level. See, there's a difference between acting and being. With an intellect full of that information, you could act better. But it's not about acting better. It's about being better. And acting better just gets in the way because you act through your whole life, and you even lose touch with who you are. You don't know who you are. You don't know what's at your being level. Your core is invisible to you because your whole life is nothing more than acting. You're in a culture. The culture expects things of you. You act in certain ways to get along with your culture. You can't act outside of that constraint because you've just learned that you can't. That's the culture constrains you to that. The culture says you can't act in these ways. Okay, so it's a set of constraints on you if it comes in with your intellect. What you need to come in with is just your being level, and you need to be authentic, interact with the world at the being level, and then grow up from there. So when you change, you're changing yourself. You're really a different person, not the same old person who's acting differently. You are differently. It's not that you say, I want to help that little old lady across the street because I think it's a good thing to do. It's you just help her because it's what you do. Not because you think it's a good thing to do, because you don't think at all. You just do because that's you. You see, there's a difference. So people would say, people who are used to acting their way through life like to have all that information because it would help them act the way they think they ought to be. What they don't understand is acting isn't valuable. Being is valuable. And if you had all this intellectual stuff passed on, you'd be just acting. And you'd inherit all the stuff that already backed you into a corner here. You weren't growing much because you'd done that, been there, knew everything, had everything figured out as best you could, which wasn't very good at all. But here's the way it was. You kind of get set in your ways, right? You get older, you get set in your ways. You don't really like new experiences. You don't really learn much. The old dog doesn't learn many new tricks. You kind of get down to the point where you're kind of dysfunctional as far as growing up because you've kind of backed yourself into a corner with all this intellectual stuff. Well, get rid of that. That's just junk. That's the baggage that you don't want to carry with you. You've already backed yourself in a corner. Why say, wow, I sure wish I could have all those, constraints that I had, when I passed away last time, so I could not do very well this time too. That doesn't make any sense. You want to get rid of all that stuff, start over, and be. And the people that feel inadequate to be, it's because they're acting. And if they had more information, they could act better. You see, that's the feeling. Well, if I knew what the answers were, I could get a better grade on the test. Well, if you knew what the answers were, the test's meaningless. You see, if you come with the answers, then why even bother to take the test? The test doesn't mean anything. You're trying to cheat the test by making a better grade than you deserve because you're getting the answers ahead, you see. That's not what we want to do. We want to take the test at the being level, interact with the world, get the feedback, and change at the being level. And if we let our intellects get in the way, all we do is act our way through it. We don't even know who we are on the inside, except every once in a while we have this what do we call it, our unconscious jerks us around, gives us an emotion, makes us cry or run or do whatever we do. And we don't even know why we do that. It's just some thing inside of us that jerks us around. Well, that's because we really don't know who we are. That's why we have this secret unconscious that's outside of our consciousness. That's our being level in there, and we're not acquainted with it. That's what the subconscious is. It's your being level, and you don't know why it's doing that. Why do you feel that way? Why do you suddenly break into tears when such and such a thing happens? Well, if you knew yourself, you'd know. You'd understand all that. You wouldn't have a subconscious. You'd just be conscious. None of it would be sub. You'd be aware of everything about you. Understand who you are. So you see, we don't want that. So that's why. And the second thing is it's very impractical. How would you sort this knowledge such that it wouldn't be overwhelming? You had 10,000 lifetimes. You can have all of those memories, all of the 10,000 lifetimes, all of the 50,000, 100,000 people that you were close to, that you loved, that loved you.
Right.
All of those relationships, you're going to bring all of those along. That, of course, doesn't make any sense. And if you say, well, okay, I understand that's a problem. We'll just take the last 2 or 3 and bring them along. I could deal with that. That would be in your way. It would confuse you. It would get in the way of what you were doing. And it would prevent you from your optimal growth and growing up. So we have this, so where were we? Okay, we have this virtual reality now, and a individuated unit of consciousness takes a part of itself, detaches it from any virtual reality, any data stream. A virtual reality is defined by a data stream to an individual. Every individual has their own personal data stream. And no 2 data streams are alike, just as no 2 people are alike, because no 2 people have the same experience base. So this data, this piece is not conscious. This little subset is not conscious until it gets a data stream. And once it gets attached to the PMR, physical matter reality data stream, the data stream that defines this physical universe, virtual reality, then it is conscious because now it has a data stream. Before it was just potential consciousness, and it's immersed entirely. Why do we do it that way? Because the individuated unit of consciousness doesn't want to be immersed. The individual unit of consciousness is the collector. It may have 2 or 3 of these incarnations going at once. It wants to collect all the data. Besides, it's getting the data, and it's looking at all the data in whole. It's trying to see if some of what it learns here will inform some of what it learned there to get a better, see, it's looking at the whole thing. And by looking at the whole thing, it can find lessons and learning that it won't find by just looking at, one individual one. It can see the bigger picture of these lives. So all of that data from its free will awareness unit feeds back up to the individuated unit of consciousness, who is the accumulator, the synthesizer, the looking at it from the big picture and internalizing it and growing up. Okay, so the next time it does a free will awareness unit, it goes out with a little higher level of potential. You see? But it still starts from scratch. So that little free will awareness unit is immersed. And that's a different kind of arrangement than in World of Warcraft. In World of Warcraft, we're sitting here watching our elf run around on the World of Warcraft map, in the World of Warcraft world. But we're not immersed. We get up and take a break, go to the refrigerator, make a sandwich, go outside and play or something. Then we come back and sit down and resume the game. We're not immersed in it. Now, some kids almost get immersed in it. They get into that thing and they don't eat, they don't do anything, they just play, they're in it, and they don't know anything else that's going around. And they may be immersed for a while, maybe for a few hours, but they're not really totally immersed. They're not living and breathing it 24/7. That's total immersion. And that's what you need in order to grow in this thing. You can't say, oh, well, I'm kind of having a hard time over here in this physical reality. And then just take a break from that. And when you take a break, your character, like the World of Warcraft, they just stand there and wait for you to come back, and they wobble a little bit. They kind of like this, they wobble around while you go make a sandwich, and then you come back, you play them again. That, it doesn't work here because this is a real tight rule set. It has to be continuous play. It has to be immersion. And the individuated unit of consciousness isn't up for immersion. It's up for collection, synthesis, and trying to grow from it. So that's the way it is. So now in this free will awareness unit, which is what I call little c consciousness, that's the consciousness that's in our head. That's the little c consciousness that's immersed now in this game. When that's done, when that avatar dies, that free will awareness unit is done. It's gone, disintegrated. Don't use that anymore, you see. But the history of it, the data of everything it thought, everything it felt, everything in this database of consciousness, everything that went through that consciousness, all the feelings, all the sensations, everything from before it was born till its death is all in the past database. So that's there. But this particular free will awareness unit is just gone. That's the way it is. It's done its thing, played its part, it dies, and now that individuated unit of consciousness can go have another one, another free will awareness unit, or two of them if it wants, to play them in this game at a little higher level now because it learned from that last one. So that's the way it works. And let me caution you again, this is not, don't take it literally. These are metaphors, they're functional metaphors. We know consciousness has these functions because we see it. I've experienced it in the larger conscious system. I experience it here. Everybody experiences, we are immersed here. Okay? We also are connected to something larger because evolution takes time. Evolution doesn't happen in one step. You don't start out, I'm a baby, and now, wham, I'm an adult. An hour later, I turn into an adult. It doesn't work that way. You have to grow through all those stages. Becoming love is not a simple thing that you just do one shot. It's something you have to accumulate over a whole lot of experience. So we need that accumulator function, the thing that takes all the data in and assesses it, does the synthesis and learns and grows from it. And then you need that subset that's immersed and just has the experience, makes the choices. So what the consciousness is doing is making all the choices for the avatar. The avatar doesn't do anything that the consciousness doesn't make the choice for. The avatar is just like the elf. It's just a computation out of a computer. The avatar doesn't have a brain. The avatar doesn't have a physical body. The avatar doesn't have a consciousness of its own. The consciousness, the free will awareness unit, is the consciousness, and the rest of it is just a virtual reality data generated in a computer. See? But that free will awareness unit that gets born starts learning how to interpret the data stream. It gets a data stream, and it has to figure out how to interpret that data. It's not immediately clear how to interpret any of the data. It has to learn, what's what, who's who, light from dark, mom from dad, apple from peach. It learns all this stuff as it experiences it. So it begins to build its own experience here. And that's how it has to go. So that may make it a little more understandable looking at this functional model. Now, these things are metaphors. We make these up so that we can talk about these functions, because understanding the functions help you understand the process that consciousness has to go through. So we give them names: individual unit of consciousness, free will awareness unit, and we say what the function of each of these is and how that works. So there's a couple of things to get here, and one of them is that the virtual reality's rules of interaction creates the context that enables the free will choice and its consequences to exist within a consistent framework called a reality frame. Okay, and virtual realities are fundamental to consciousness, just as time and free will are fundamental to consciousness. Okay, you can't have consciousness, a full consciousness, not just a proto-conscious or a primordial consciousness, but a real full-blown consciousness with a finite decision space. You can't have consciousness, as we think of it, a communicating, interacting consciousness, until you have at least a virtual reality big enough to communicate with. You see? Otherwise, you just have awareness. And that awareness is maybe just aware of this state and that, and it's be able to change that, but that's it. See, it's very limited. We think of consciousness as this interactive thing that's taking in data and passing out data, and that doesn't really happen until you have a VR where it can communicate. So we have consciousness, we have free will, and we have a virtual reality. Okay, well, I guess I should say we have awareness, free will, and a virtual reality. Those together really enable the kind of consciousness that we think of when we think of consciousness. So that's kind of an interesting thing. Consciousness requires all of those, because without free will, there's no choice. Without choice, there's no consciousness. There's no growth. What are you conscious of if you don't have any choice? There's nothing for consciousness to do. There's no way to express it if there's no choice. Then it's a deterministic thing that just stays and never changes. It doesn't grow, it doesn't become, it doesn't have any point. If it doesn't grow, it doesn't become, doesn't do anything, well, it's superfluous. It doesn't have any point. So evolution does not create things that have no point. Evolution creates things that work. So that's the idea. You need time, you need virtual reality, you need awareness. And if you have all those, then you get consciousness, and we kind of show that all that can just evolve, starting with a little good luck and randomness, and then after that it's not so random, because our evolution isn't entirely random, because part of a feedback in our larger that our larger conscious system has given us in this virtual reality is intent modifies future probability. That's a feedback for us. That way we create a world that reflects ourselves, which is feedback, is what we are and what we need to be. So that's part of the feedback process. Okay, so that's an important connection there with us, that we create, in a lot of ways, we create our own reality. Our reality reflects us, the way we are, the way we truly are. Not the way we'd like to be or the way we think we are, but what we see out there is really the way we are. Not a pretty picture right now, but the picture's getting better. So we need time. There is no consciousness as we understand it without time. There is no consciousness we understand it without free will. Because the whole thing won't work without those